There are men who lose everything in a single day. And then there are men who lose something much more valuable without ever realizing it. Jacob Reed belonged to the second kind. At 35 years old, he owned a small cattle ranch on the outskirts of Silver Creek, Montana. The land stretched across 250 acres of rolling grass and scattered cottonwood trees. It wasn't terrible land. It simply wasn't enough. At least that was what Jacob told himself. Every morning before sunrise, he walked the fence lines with a lantern in one hand and a notebook in the other. He counted cattle. He counted repairs. He counted expenses. Most of all, he counted reasons why his life wasn't what it should have been. The north pasture needed work. The barn roof leaked whenever heavy rain came through. Half the equipment was older than he was. And every year, it seemed that someone else's ranch was growing while his remained exactly where it was. Jacob never complained about it. He simply accepted it. Years earlier, after a devastating wildfire swept through the valley, his father had lost nearly everything the family owned. The original Reed Ranch had burned to the ground. Jacob had been 17. Old enough to understand loss. Young enough to believe he could somehow fix it. For nearly 2 decades he worked harder than anyone in Silver Creek. Yet no matter how much progress he made, he always felt one step behind. As if life had started him in a race he was never meant to win. And unfortunately, that same way of thinking affected more than just his ranch. It affected Clara Bennett, the woman who lived on the neighboring property. The woman he had loved for 7 years. The woman he never intended to tell. Clara's ranch wasn't large. 40 acres. A modest farmhouse. A red stable. And a garden so productive that half the town bought vegetables from her every summer. Unlike Jacob, Clara seemed to possess a gift for seeing possibilities where others saw problems. When drought hit, she adapted. When storms damaged fences, she repaired them. When life became difficult, she somehow found a reason to smile anyway. Jacob admired that. Perhaps admired wasn't the right word. Loved was more accurate. But love required courage. And courage was difficult when a man spent his life convincing himself he wasn't enough. For 7 years their friendship grew. They repaired fences together. Shared equipment during busy seasons. Helped each other move livestock during floods. When Jacob broke his leg after being thrown from a horse, Clara delivered meals every evening for nearly a month. When Clara's roof collapsed during a winter storm, Jacob spent 4 days rebuilding it. Neither of them ever kept score. They simply showed up whenever the other needed help. To everyone else in town their future seemed obvious. To Jacob it seemed impossible. Because whenever he imagined a life with Clara, another thought followed. She deserves better. The sentence appeared so often in his mind that eventually he stopped questioning it. It simply became truth. Or what he believed was truth. One crisp October morning, everything began to change. The news arrived at Miller's General Store. Jacob was purchasing feed when he overheard 2 ranchers talking near the counter. "Did you hear?" "Hear what?" "Henry Lawson is coming to Silver Creek." The second rancher nearly dropped his coffee. "The businessman from Denver?" "The same one." Jacob recognized the name immediately. Everyone did. Henry Lawson owned thousands of acres across 3 states. His cattle operation was legendary. His wealth was the kind people talked about in newspapers. "What brings him here?" someone asked. The answer came quickly. "Apparently he's interested in buying land around Silver Creek." The conversation continued. Jacob stopped listening. Because another thought had suddenly entered his mind. Claire. Henry Lawson was wealthy, successful, educated. Everything Jacob believed himself not to be. The idea bothered him more than it should have. He paid for his supplies and left. Yet all day long the thought followed him across the ranch. By evening he found himself standing outside Clara's gate. She was collecting vegetables from her garden. The setting sun painted the valley in gold. For a moment Jacob simply watched. Clara noticed him and smiled. "There you are." He returned the smile. "Brought your fencing pliers back. You could have kept them another week." "I said I'd return them." "Which is exactly why I knew you would." That was Clara. She always sounded as though she understood him better than he understood himself. The thought made him uncomfortable. Because if she truly understood him, she might eventually discover how he felt. And if she discovered that, well, he never allowed himself to finish that sentence. They talked about ordinary things. The weather. The cattle market. Repairs needed before winter. Then Clara casually mentioned something. I received a letter today. Jacob felt a strange tension in his chest. Oh. She nodded. Henry Lawson is coming next month. There it was. The name. Spoken aloud. He knew my father years ago. Jacob forced himself to remain calm. That's quite something. He wants to visit. She studied him carefully. Jacob looked away first. The silence stretched. Finally Clara asked, "What do you think?" The truthful answer would have been complicated. Instead he chose the safe one. "I think he's probably worth meeting." The words felt wrong the moment they left his mouth. Yet Clara only nodded. Maybe. Jacob returned home that evening feeling strangely tired. Not physically. Emotionally. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine Clara marrying someone else. The image hurt more than expected. A week later, Clara's best friend Evelyn Brooks visited her ranch. Evelyn was known throughout Silver Creek for one particular trait. She never avoided uncomfortable conversations. That afternoon, while drinking tea on Clara's porch, she got directly to the point. "You're worried?" Clara sighed. "No. That's a lie." Clara laughed softly. "You always know." "Then tell me." Clara stared across the valley. Toward Jacob's ranch. Toward the weathered barn visible in the distance. Toward the man who seemed determined to misunderstand everything. "Jacob thinks I should meet Henry Lawson." Evelyn rolled her eyes. "Of course he does." Clara looked at her. "What does that mean?" "It means Jacob Reed is the only man in Montana capable of standing directly in front of the woman he loves and encouraging her to marry someone else." Clara froze. Neither spoke for several moments. Finally Evelyn continued. "He loves you." "I know." The answer came quietly. Without hesitation. Without uncertainty. Evelyn blinked. "You know? I've known for years." "Then why hasn't anything happened?" Clara's smile faded. "Because he doesn't believe he deserves it." The words carried sadness rather than frustration. "He measures himself against everyone else. Every ranch. Every success. Every mistake. And he always decides he's losing." Evelyn shook her head. "Then stop waiting." Clara looked away. "I can't." "Why not?" "Because if I say it first, he'll spend the rest of his life wondering whether I settled." The truth hung between them. Painful because it was real. Clara loved Jacob. Had loved him for years. But she wanted him to choose happiness. Not stumble into it accidentally. Unfortunately, Jacob seemed determined to remain blind. And time was running out. Because Henry Lawson would arrive in Silver Creek in less than 3 weeks. Meanwhile, Jacob continued pretending everything was normal. He repaired fences. Prepared cattle for winter. Fixed loose boards in the barn. Worked from sunrise until long after dark. But no amount of work could silence the growing fear inside him. Everywhere he went, people talked about Henry Lawson. His success. His business. His future plans. Each conversation felt like another reminder of what Jacob lacked. Eventually he began convincing himself that stepping aside was the honorable thing to do. That real love meant wanting the best for Clara. Even if the best wasn't him. It sounded noble. It sounded mature. But deep down, another truth existed. He was afraid. Afraid of rejection. Afraid of hope. Afraid of discovering that the life he wanted most might never be his. 3 weeks passed. Then one cold November evening, a black carriage rolled into Silver Creek. Henry Lawson had arrived. And as Jacob watched from across the street, a terrible realization settled over him. For 7 years he had remained silent. For 7 years he had hidden behind excuses. For 7 years he had convinced himself there would always be more time. Now time had finally run out. And for the first time in his life, Jacob Reed wondered if fear was about to cost him the one thing he could never replace. The woman he loved. To be continued? The first snowfall of the season arrived the same night Henry Lawson reached Silver Creek. By morning, a thin layer of white covered the valley. The fences. The rooftops. The open fields. Everything looked clean and untouched. Jacob Reed wished his thoughts were the same. For 3 weeks he had prepared himself for this moment. He had convinced himself that Clara deserved a man like Henry Lawson. A man with wealth, influence, security. A man who could offer her things Jacob never could. Now that Henry was actually in town, the idea should have brought peace. Instead, it felt like someone had wrapped a rope around his chest and pulled tighter every hour. The next morning, Jacob was repairing storm damage to the old stable behind Clara's property when he saw her approaching. She wore a thick brown coat and carried a toolbox. The wind moved loose strands of her dark hair across her face. As always, she looked completely at home in the cold. "Thought you could use some help," she said. Jacob nodded. "Always can." For a while they worked in silence, hammering loose boards back into place, replacing damaged supports. The familiar rhythm of years spent working side by side. Normally being around Clara settled him. Today it only made everything harder. Because somewhere in town Henry Lawson was probably unpacking his luggage, preparing to meet her, preparing to offer her a future Jacob believed he couldn't match. The thought gnawed at him. Finally, unable to stop himself, he spoke. "You should spend time with him." Clara stopped hammering. "What?" Jacob kept his eyes on the wooden beam. "Lawson." Silence. "He seems like a good man." More silence. Jacob continued. "A man like that could give you everything." The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them. Not because they weren't true. Because they weren't the whole truth. The whole truth was that every word felt like a knife. Clara slowly set her hammer down. Then she stood. Jacob sensed the change immediately. Something had shifted. When he looked up, she was staring directly at him. Not angry. Not sad. Something else. Something far more dangerous. She was tired. Tired of excuses. Tired of silence. Tired of watching a good man talk himself out of happiness. For several seconds neither spoke. The winter wind moved through the stable. A horse shifted in its stall nearby. Finally Clara stepped closer. "Jacob." Her voice was calm. Too calm. He swallowed. "Yeah." She folded her arms. "Do you really believe that?" The question caught him off guard. "What?" "That Henry Lawson can give me everything." Jacob hesitated. "He's wealthy." "That's not what I asked." The directness hit him like a punch. Clara took another step forward. "Do you honestly think I measure people the way you do?" Jacob looked away. The familiar feeling returned. The one that had followed him for years. Not enough. Never enough. Clara saw it immediately. Of course she did. She had always seen it. "Look at me." Slowly Jacob raised his eyes. What he saw surprised him. There were tears in hers. Not tears of sadness. Tears of frustration. 7 years of frustration. "Do you know how many men have asked me to marry them?" Jacob blinked. "What?" "Answer me." "I don't know." 6. The number stunned him. Clara continued. 6 men. The stable became completely silent. "I said no to every one of them." Jacob stared. His mind struggled to keep up. "Why?" A small, almost disbelieving laugh escaped her. "You're seriously asking me that?" He was. Because he genuinely didn't understand. And that realization finally broke whatever patience Clara had left. For 7 years she had waited. For 7 years she had hoped. For 7 years she had watched him choose fear over possibility. No more. She stepped directly in front of him. "Because none of them were you." Jacob froze. The world seemed to stop moving. The wind. The horses. The snow falling outside. Everything. Clara's voice softened. "None of them were the man who rebuilt his family's ranch after losing everything." Jacob couldn't speak. "None of them were the man who spent 4 days repairing my roof during a blizzard." His chest tightened. "None of them were the man who checks on elderly neighbors after every storm." A tear slid down her cheek. "None of them were the man I've loved for 7 years." The words landed harder than anything Jacob had ever heard. For a moment he honestly wondered if he had imagined them. Well, 7 years. The same amount of time. The same impossible secret. His mouth opened. No words came out. Clara shook her head. "You spent years counting everything you didn't have." She gestured toward the valley. "The ranch. The stable. The cattle. The money. You counted every shortage. Every mistake. Every setback. But you never counted the things that actually mattered." Jacob felt something breaking inside him. Not painfully. Relief. The collapse of a burden he had carried for far too long. Clara stepped closer. "You think Henry Lawson has more than you?" Jacob remained silent. She smiled sadly. "Henry Lawson doesn't know how I take my coffee." A faint laugh escaped him. "He doesn't know what scares me. What makes me happy. What songs my mother used to sing. He wasn't there when my father died. Jacob's eyes lowered. He wasn't there when I thought I'd lose this ranch. Her voice became gentle. You were. The truth hit harder than any argument ever could. Because she was right. He had been there. Every storm. Every difficult season. Every hard year. Not because he expected anything. Because he cared. And somehow he had convinced himself that didn't matter. Clara reached for his hand. Jacob Reed. He looked at her. I don't want Henry Lawson. The tears in her eyes were now mixed with a smile. I want the stubborn rancher who keeps fixing fences even when they're not his responsibility. A laugh escaped her. The man who apologizes to horses when he accidentally startles them. Jacob laughed despite himself. The man who spent 7 years loving me and somehow thought I couldn't tell. For the first time in years, Jacob stopped arguing with reality. Stopped searching for reasons. Stopped counting what was missing. Instead, he looked at the woman standing in front of him. The woman who had chosen him long before he ever believed he was worth choosing. And finally he told the truth. I love you. The words came out rough. Simple. Honest. Clara smiled. I know. I've loved you for years. I know that too. A moment later she was laughing through tears. And Jacob was laughing with her. Because suddenly everything seemed ridiculous. 7 years. 7 years wasted because two people had been waiting for the other to move first. He shook his head. I've been an idiot. An extraordinary one. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. She pointed a finger at him. You still owe me 7 years of missed conversations. Jacob laughed. I suppose I do. At that exact moment, a voice came from behind them. I appear to have arrived late. They turned. Standing near the stable entrance was Henry Lawson. For a horrifying second, Jacob thought the wealthy businessman had heard everything. Then Henry smiled. A knowing smile. I only caught the last minute. Clara covered her face in embarrassment. Henry chuckled. I've negotiated cattle contracts for 20 years. I know when a deal has already been made. Even Jacob laughed. Henry extended his hand. Jacob shook it. Take care of her. Jacob nodded. I will. I know. And just like that, the great rival Jacob had feared for weeks disappeared. Not defeated. Simply irrelevant. Because Clara's choice had never been between two men. It had been between truth and silence. And truth had finally won. 3 months later, during the deepest snowfall Silver Creek had seen in years, Jacob invited Clara to his ranch. The evening sky glowed with stars. The valley below looked silver beneath moonlight. They sat together on the porch wrapped in blankets, talking about spring, talking about cattle, talking about a future they no longer had to imagine separately. Then Jacob grew quiet. Clara immediately noticed. You've got that look. What look? The one that means you've been thinking too much. He laughed. Fair. Then he reached into his coat pocket. Clara's eyes widened. A small gold ring rested in his hand. Simple. Beautiful. Family heirloom. His grandmother's. Jacob looked at her. 1,000 speeches had passed through his mind. In the end he used none of them. Marry me. Clara smiled. That all? I had a longer version. What happened to it? I forgot it. She laughed. Then tears filled her eyes again. Good. Jacob blinked. Good? I prefer this one. The answer came immediately. Yes. The valley echoed with nothing. No applause. No music. No audience. Just two people choosing each other. And somehow that was enough. Years passed. The fence separating their properties disappeared. The ranches became one. The stable was rebuilt. The cattle operation expanded. 2 children eventually filled the house with noise and chaos. Life remained difficult at times. There were droughts, harsh winters, financial setbacks, long nights. But unlike before, Jacob never faced them alone. One summer evening nearly 20 years later, he sat beside Clara on the porch watching the sunset over the valley. The ranch stretched across the horizon. Healthy cattle grazed peacefully. Their children had families of their own. The stable still stood, stronger than ever. Clara noticed him smiling. What are you thinking about? Jacob looked across the land, then toward her. Finally he answered. I spent half my life believing I was poor. Clara squeezed his hand. And? Jacob smiled. I was the richest man in Montana. The setting sun painted the valley gold. Clara rested her head on his shoulder. And Jacob Reed finally understood a lesson that had taken him decades to learn. Real wealth was never measured in acres, or cattle, or money. It was measured in who stood beside you when the storms came. And in that regard he had been wealthy all along.